Sometimes the hardest thing about losing everything is pretending you're fine. For 51-year-old Delilah Hart, each morning starts with milking 4 Jersey cows on her father's half-acre, the last piece of a dream that once stretched for miles. When a dust-covered horseman stops at her well, she offers him fresh milk, the kind gesture of a woman who still believes in simple kindness. The stranger calls himself Wade, but he's hiding something big. Wade Carmichael owns every ranch for miles around, worth more than most small cities. Yet something about Dell's honest ways reminds him of who he was before money changed everything. When Dell's world falls apart, floods, debts, men wanting her land, Wade has to choose between staying hidden or showing his true power. But what happens when a proud woman who never asks for help discovers the cowboy drinking her milk could buy her entire county? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Texas sky in shades of rose and gold as Delilah Hart stepped from her weathered porch, the screen door creaking its familiar greeting. At 51, she moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to make every motion count. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver threads she'd earned through years of worry and determination, was pulled back in a practical bun that wouldn't interfere with the morning milking. The 4 Jersey cows stood waiting in their small paddock, their soft brown eyes reflecting the early light. Bessie, the eldest at 12, lifted her head with the dignity of a dowager empress. Clover and Daisy, the younger pair, shuffled restlessly, eager for their grain. And sweet Molly, barely 3, still carried the curiosity of youth in her gentle gaze. "Morning, girls," Dell murmured, her voice carrying the warmth that had sustained her through 30 years of marriage, 10 years of widowhood, and now 5 years of this solitary life. She carried her father's old milk pail, dented and worn, but still functional, much like everything else on the Hart place. The half-acre spread barely qualified as a ranch, but it held the bones of something that had once been grand. Dell's great-grandfather had claimed 2,000 acres here, in 1892, building an empire from nothing but determination and the kind of stubborn hope that ran in the Hart bloodline. Her grandfather had lost half of it during the Depression, selling acre by acre to keep the family fed. Her father had lost most of what remained, piece by piece, to bad luck and worse timing. Now Dell clung to this final fragment, like a woman holding the last photograph of a lost love. She settled onto the 3-legged stool beside Bessie, her hands finding their rhythm in the ancient dance of milking. The warm streams hitting the pail created a musical percussion that had marked her mornings for more years than she cared to count. This was meditation and necessity, rolled into one, the simple act that kept her connected to the land and provided just enough income to survive. The leather journal tucked in her back pocket, pressed against her hip, a constant reminder of the weight she carried. Her father's final gift, passed to her the day before he died, contained not just his dreams, but his debts, his hopes, and his quiet desperation, written in fading ink. She'd read every entry so many times she could recite them from memory, each word a thread binding her to this place. "The land remembers," he'd written on the last page, his handwriting shaky but determined. "Even when we forget our worth, the land remembers what we built here. Don't let them take the memory, Delilah. Don't let them erase what the Harts put into this soil." The morning routine continued with the precision of a well-choreographed dance. Feed the chickens, check the water troughs, inspect the fence line that grew a little more precarious each month. Every task was performed with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford to replace anything that broke. Dell's former life felt like a story she'd read about someone else. 28 years married to Frank Morrison, a good man who'd tried to love her father's land as much as she did. They'd bought the place from her father for $1 and the promise to keep it in the family. Frank had understood that the land wasn't just property, it was legacy, identity, the physical manifestation of generations of Hart dreams. They'd tried for children, spending years and small fortunes on specialists who spoke in clinical terms about unexplained infertility. The disappointment had carved hollow spaces in their marriage that they'd tried to fill with work, with travel, with the pretense that two people could be enough. When Frank died of a heart attack at 53, Dell had discovered that love and financial security weren't the same thing. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses, and the medical bills from his final months had devoured their savings. The divorce from her brief second marriage 2 years later had been a mercy for both parties. Jim Patterson had been a decent man who'd wanted to save her, but Dell had learned that some women couldn't be saved, they could only save themselves. Now, at 51, she'd found a kind of peace in the simplicity of survival. The cows provided milk that she sold to a local organic cooperative. The chickens laid eggs that brought a few dollars at the farmer's market. The small garden behind the house fed her through the summer months. It wasn't prosperity, but it was independence, and Dell had paid too high a price for that independence to give it up easily. The sound of hoofbeats on the dirt road pulled her attention from her work. A lone rider approached, his horse moving with the easy gait of an animal that had covered many miles. Dell straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun. The horseman was a study in weathered elegance, tall in the saddle, with silver threading through dark hair beneath a hat that had seen better decades. His clothes were simple but well-made cotton shirt, worn jeans, boots that spoke of serious riding rather than fashion. He appeared to be in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that suggested both strength and thoughtfulness. "Morning, ma'am," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Mind if I water my horse at your well?" Dell gestured toward the old stone well that had served 3 generations of Harts. "Help yourself. There's fresh water." The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on foot. His horse, a magnificent bay gelding, moved toward the water with obvious relief. Dell noticed the animal's quality. This was no common trail horse, but a creature bred for both endurance and beauty. "I'm Wade," the man offered, extending a hand that was calloused but clean. "Wade Carmichael, I appreciate the hospitality." "Dell Hart," she replied, accepting his handshake. His grip was firm without being presumptuous, and she noticed he didn't hold on longer than necessary, a sign of respect she'd learned to value. "You're welcome to it. Water's free, and there's plenty." Wade studied the small spread with the eye of someone who understood land. Dell watched him take in the neat fences, the healthy cows, the well-maintained buildings that spoke of pride despite obvious financial constraints. She found herself hoping he saw what she saw, not poverty, but careful stewardship. "Fine-looking jerseys," he observed, genuine appreciation in his voice. "They're not the easiest breed to manage, but they give the richest milk." Dell felt a warmth spread through her chest. Too few people understood the difference between a Jersey and a Holstein, much less appreciated the former's superior cream content. "My father always said Jerseys were the aristocrats of the dairy world, harder to handle but worth the trouble." "Your father was a wise man." Wade's voice carried the weight of someone who understood loss. "This his place? His father's before him, and his father's before that." Dell heard the pride in her own voice and didn't try to hide it. "Heartland since 1892. Something flickered in Wade's expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. But it passed so quickly Dell might have imagined it. That's real heritage. Not many families can claim that kind of continuity. Not many families are stubborn enough to hold on to land that probably should have been sold decades ago. Dell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Common sense would say this place is more trouble than it's worth. Common sense doesn't always account for the things that matter most. Wade stroked his horse's neck, a gesture that spoke of genuine affection. Some things are worth more than their market value. Dell felt a flutter of recognition, the sensation of meeting someone who spoke her language. "You sound like you understand that particular kind of foolishness." "I've known a few folks who valued legacy over logic," Wade said carefully. "Always respected them for it, even when it cost them." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a battered pickup truck that wheezed to a stop beside the fence. Dell's stomach tightened as she recognized the driver, Tommy Brennan, whose family had run the local feed store for 40 years and who'd been extending her credit for the past 6 months. "Morning, Dell," Tommy called, his usual cheerfulness strained. "Brought your order." Dell walked to the truck, aware of Wade's discreet attention. Tommy unloaded 50-pound bags of grain with the careful movements of a man carrying more than feed. His weathered face showed the strain of someone caught between friendship and business necessity. "Dell, I hate to bring this up, but—" "I know." Dell's voice was gentle but firm. "You need payment for the last 3 months." Tommy's relief was palpable. "The wife's been after me to collect the outstanding accounts. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." "Of course," Dell calculated quickly, knowing the numbers by heart. "I'll have it for you by Friday. The cooperative pays on Thursday." "I appreciate it." Tommy's smile was genuine now. "You know I'd carry you longer if I could." After Tommy left, Dell found Wade watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Embarrassment heated her, cheek-shaving her financial struggles witnessed by a stranger felt like being caught in her undergarments. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said, focusing on the ground between them. "Nothing to apologize for." Wade's voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "Running a place like this takes courage. Most people wouldn't have the backbone for it." Dell looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Most people would call it foolish pride. Most people never built anything worth keeping. Wade gathered his reins, preparing to mount. "Pride in what you've built isn't foolish, it's necessary." As he settled into the saddle, Dell felt an unexpected impulse. "Would you like some milk? Fresh from this morning's milking. It's the least I can offer for the water." Wade paused, something shifting in his expression. "I'd be honored." Dell retrieved a clean tin cup from the kitchen, filling it with milk still warm from Bessie's generous contribution. She handed it to Wade, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Wade drank deeply, his eyes closing in appreciation. "That's the finest milk I've tasted in years. Makes store-bought seem like white water." "Jersey milk spoils you for anything else," Dell agreed, pleasure warming her voice. "Once you've had the real thing, everything else is just a pale imitation." Wade finished the milk and handed back the cup. "Thank you, Delilah Hart, for the water, the milk, and the reminder that some things are still done right in this world." "You're welcome any time," Dell heard herself say, surprising herself with the invitation. Wade touched his hat brim again, a gesture that seemed to come from an earlier, more courteous age. "I might take you up on that. This is good country for riding." Dell watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the vast Texas sky. The tin cup in her hand still held the warmth of his touch, and she found herself wondering who Wade Carmichael really was. There had been something in his eyes' knowledge, perhaps, or a kind of careful watching that suggested he saw more than he revealed. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Plenty of men drifted through this country, some running from something, others running toward it. Wade seemed like the latter type of man with purpose, even if that purpose remained hidden. Dell returned to her morning routine, but something had shifted in the quality of the day. The loneliness that usually settled over her like morning mist had lifted slightly, replaced by the memory of genuine conversation and shared understanding. It had been months since she'd talked to anyone who seemed to truly hear her words, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. The sun climbed higher, painting the small ranch in shades of gold and amber. Dell worked steadily, her movements automatic after years of practice, but her mind kept returning to the stranger who'd appreciated her father's wisdom and understood the value of things that couldn't be measured in dollars. By the time she'd finished her morning chores, the memory of Wade Carmichael had settled into her consciousness like a small, warm stone, something to be turned over and examined when the day's work was done. She didn't know if she'd see him again, but she found herself hoping she would. It had been too long since someone had looked at her land and seen its worth rather than its limitations. As Dell headed toward the house to prepare for another day of careful survival, she didn't notice the dust cloud on the horizon, black sedan moving slowly along the county road. its occupant studying her property with the calculating eyes of men who measured everything in terms of profit and loss. The wheels of change were already turning, and Dell Hart's quiet morning had been the calm before a storm she couldn't yet imagine. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a postal worker who wouldn't meet Dell's eyes. She signed for it with fingers that trembled slightly, though she told herself it was just the morning chill. The envelope bore the return address of Meridian Financial Services, a name that had haunted her dreams for months. Dell set the letter on her kitchen table and stared at it while her coffee grew cold. She'd been expecting this moment, dreading it, but expecting it nonetheless. The past due notices had been arriving with increasing frequency, each one more urgent than the last. But there was something final about certified mail, something that spoke of doors closing and options disappearing. When she finally opened it, the words seemed to leap from the page with vicious clarity. Notice of intent to foreclose, 30 days to bring the account current, 30 days to pay $17,000 she didn't have, 30 days to save everything her family had built over 4 generations. Dell's hands shook as she read the legal language that reduced her life to terms like default and acceleration of debt. The mortgage she'd taken out 5 years ago to pay Frank's medical bills had seemed manageable then. Even after the divorce, even with the reduced income from her small operation, she'd believed she could find a way to keep up with the payments. But belief and reality were two different things, and reality had sharp teeth. She was still sitting at the table, the letter spread before her like a death certificate, when she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats. Through the window, she saw Wade Carmichael approaching, his bay gelding moving with the same easy grace as before. For a moment, Dell considered not answering the door. The shame of her situation felt too raw, too immediate to share with anyone, especially someone who'd shown her kindness. But Wade's knock was gentle, respectful, and Dell found herself opening the door despite her embarrassment. "Morning, Dell," he said, his hat in his hands. "I was hoping I might trouble you for another cup of that fine milk. Yesterday's taste has been haunting me." Dell managed a smile, though it felt brittle on her lips. "Of course. I'll be right back." She moved toward the kitchen, but Wade's voice stopped her. "Dell, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Dell turned back, and something in his expression, the genuine concern, the quiet strength broke through her defenses. "I suppose I have in a way. The ghost of all my failures." Wade stepped into the small living room, his presence somehow making the space feel both smaller and safer. "Mind if I ask what's troubling you?" Dell gestured toward the letter on the table. 30 days. That's what I've got to save this place. 30 days to find money I don't have for a debt I can't pay." Wade's eyes found the foreclosure notice, and Dell saw something shift in his expressiona, tightening around the eyes, a set to his jaw that spoke of controlled anger. "Meridian Financial," he said quietly. "They're aggressive in their collection practices." "You know them?" Dell was surprised by the familiarity in his tone. "I've heard stories." Wade's voice carried a weight that suggested personal experience. "They specialize in acquiring distressed properties, usually at a fraction of their actual value." Dell sank into her father's old chair, the leather worn smooth by decades of use. $17,000. That's what stands between me and losing everything my family built. It might as well be 17 million. Wade moved to the window, looking out at the small ranch with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "This place means everything to you. It's all I have left of them, my father, my grandfather, all the Harts who came before. When I'm gone, there won't be anyone to remember what they built here." Dell's voice broke slightly. "I keep thinking about what my father wrote in his journal, about the land remembering even when we forget. But if I lose this place, who's going to remember the land?" Wade turned back to her, and Dell was struck by the intensity in his gaze. "There has to be something that can be done. Assets you could sell, family who could help." "I've sold everything worth selling. The good furniture, my mother's china, even Frank's tools. As for family," Dell laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm the last of the line, Wade. The last heart, clinging to the last piece of what we built. Wade was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the floor. When he looked up, his expression was carefully neutral. What about the local bank? Sometimes they're more willing to work with long-time customers. I tried that 2 years ago. They suggested I subdivide the land, sell off parcels for development. Said a nice mobile home park would be perfect for this location. Dell's voice carried a bitterness that surprised her. They don't understand that some things can't be divided. Some things lose their meaning when you break them apart. Wade nodded slowly. And you'd rather lose it all than see it destroyed piece by piece. I know that probably sounds foolish to you. It sounds like integrity. Wade's voice was firm. It sounds like someone who understands the difference between price and value. Dell felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry about this, wouldn't give in to the self-pity that solved nothing. I appreciate your kindness, Wade, but kindness doesn't pay mortgages. Maybe not, but it's worth something. Wade moved toward the door, then paused. Dell, I know we've only just met, but if there's anything I can do... There isn't. Dell's voice was gentle but final. This is my fight, my responsibility. I got myself into this mess, and I'll find a way out of it. Wade studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. You know, I've been thinking about staying in the area for a while. This is good country, peaceful. Mind if I camp by your creek? I'd pay for the privilege, of course. Dell was surprised by the offer. You don't need to pay me for camping by a creek. I insist. It's only fair, and I'd be happy to help with the ranch work in exchange for the accommodation. I've got experience with cattle, and I can see you could use an extra pair of hands. Dell's pride warred with her practical needs. An extra pair of hands would be welcome, and any payment, however small, would help. But accepting help felt like admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready for that surrender. Wade, I appreciate the offer, but think about it, he said gently. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a fair exchange work for accommodation, payment for the privilege of camping on your land. Business arrangement, nothing more. Dell studied his face, looking for signs of pity or condescension. Instead, she found only respectful patience. Why would you want to stay here? A man like you could afford to stay anywhere. Wade's expression flickered, just for a moment. A man like me? Educated, well-spoken, obviously experienced with good horses and quality gear. You're not just some drifter, Wade Carmichael. You're someone with means, someone who chooses to travel this way rather than being forced to. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Everyone's running from something, Dell, or toward something. Sometimes it's hard to tell which. And what are you running from, or toward? I'm trying to remember who I used to be before I became who I am now. Wade's voice carried a weight that spoke of old wounds. Sometimes, a man needs to step away from his life to see it clearly. Dell understood that sentiment more than she cared to admit. I suppose we all have seasons when we need to remember our beginnings. Exactly. Wade's smile was genuine now. So what do you say? Will you consider my offer? Dell looked at the foreclosure notice still spread on her table, then back at Wade's patient face. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, and turning down help even from a stranger might be the height of foolishness. 1 week, she said finally. We'll try it for 1 week and see how it works. Wade's smile widened. I'll get my gear and be back within the hour. After he left, Dell sat in her father's chair and stared at the letter that had changed everything. 30 days seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Part of her wondered if accepting Wade's help was Wazish knew nothing about him beyond his obvious competence and unexpected kindness. But another part of her, the part that had been carrying the weight of survival alone for too long, felt a flutter of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. She folded the foreclosure notice carefully and placed it in her father's journal, between the pages where he'd written about the land remembering. Perhaps hope was just another word for foolishness, but Dell had spent her life being foolish about the things that mattered most. 30 days. She had 30 days to find a miracle or lose everything. But for the first time in months, she wouldn't be facing those 30 days entirely alone. Wade returned within the hour, leading a pack horse loaded with gear that spoke of a man who knew how to live comfortably in the wilderness. Dell watched from her kitchen window as he made camp by the creek, his movements efficient and practiced. Everything about his setup suggested experience the way he chose his spot, with an eye for both shelter and water access, the quality of his canvas tent, the methodical way he arranged his belongings. She was pulling her grandmother's silver tea service from the cabinet when she paused, the ornate sugar bowl heavy in her hands. The set had been in her family for 3 generations, a wedding gift from her great-grandmother's Boston relatives who disapproved of her marriage to a Texas rancher. Dell had always treasured it, not for its monetary value but for its connection to family history. Now, holding it in the afternoon light, she saw only dollars and cents. The antique dealer in town had mentioned it was worth at least $2,000, enough to make a dent in her debt, even if it wouldn't solve her problems entirely. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Wade stood on her porch, his hat in his hands, looking somehow more substantial than he had that morning. "I wanted to thank you again for letting me camp here, and to ask if you'd let me help with the evening chores." Dell set the sugar bowl aside. "You don't need to earn your keep, Wade. The arrangement we made is fair enough." "Maybe so, but I'd like to be useful. It's been too long since I've done honest work with my hands." Wade glanced toward the silver service. "That's a beautiful set. Family heirloom?" "My great-grandmother's. She brought it from Boston when she married my great-grandfather." Dell's fingers traced the ornate handle. "I was just thinking it might be time to find it a new home." Wade's expression sharpened. "You're thinking of selling it?" "I'm thinking of doing whatever it takes to keep this place." Dell's voice carried a determination that masked the pain of the decision. Sentiment doesn't pay mortgages. Wade was quiet for a moment, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a silver pocket watch. The metal was worn smooth by years of handling, the engraving so faded it was barely visible. "This belonged to my grandfather. He carried it through 30 years of ranch work, never missed a day despite drought, depression, and every other hardship this country could throw at him." Dell studied the watch, noting the careful way Wade held it. "It's beautiful, and obviously precious to you. It's all I have left of him, of the man who taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by what they own, but by what they're willing to sacrifice for what matters." Wade's thumb traced the worn surface. "I've been tempted to sell it more than once, especially in the early years when I was building my when. I was trying to make my way in the world." "What stopped you?" "The knowledge that some things once lost can never be replaced. Money comes and goes, but the connection to who we were, to the people who shaped us, that's irreplaceable." Wade looked up at her. "I'm not saying you shouldn't sell the tea service if you need to. I'm just saying make sure you're ready to live without it." Dell felt the weight of his words. "I keep telling myself it's just silver, just objects. But every time I look at that sugar bowl, I remember my great-grandmother's hands pouring tea for my grandfather, the stories she told about Boston society, and how she gave it all up for love. Then maybe there's another way." Wade slipped the watch back into his pocket. "Let me help with the chores, and we'll talk about options. Sometimes a fresh perspective can reveal possibilities we can't see when we're too close to the problem." Dell found herself nodding, drawn by the quiet confidence in his voice. "All right, but I warn you, evening chores on a place this size aren't exactly exciting." Wade's smile was genuine. "I've found that the best work rarely is." They walked to the barn together, and Dell was surprised by how naturally Wade fell into the rhythm of ranch work. He moved around the cows with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent years working with livestock, his hands gentle but firm as he helped guide Bessie into her stall. "You weren't lying about having experience with cattle," Dell observed, watching him check Clover's hooves with practiced efficiency. "I grew up on a ranch. Small place, nothing fancy, but we ran a few head of cattle and learned to make do with what we had." Wade's voice carried a nostalgic warmth. "My grandfather believed that honest work was the foundation of character. He used to say that a man who couldn't care for animals had no business trying to care for people." Dell felt a familiar pang of recognition. My father used to say something similar. He believed that how you treated your livestock said everything about your character. Wise man. Wade straightened, brushing dust from his hands. This is good work, Dell. You should be proud of what you've built here. Built? Dell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Wade, I'm barely holding on. This isn't building, it's slow-motion collapse. Wade studied her face in the fading light. You're feeding 4 healthy cows, maintaining your property, producing quality milk that people value. You're honoring your family's legacy while adapting to circumstances they never faced. That's not collapse, that's resilience. Dell felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of shame she'd been carrying. I never thought of it that way. Sometimes we're too close to our own stories to see them clearly. Wade leaned against the fence, his expression thoughtful. Tell me about your father. What was he like? Dell's face softened. He was stubborn, proud, and absolutely devoted to this land. He used to walk the fence lines every morning, not because he needed to check them, but because he said it was important to greet the day on your own ground. He believed that the land held the memory of everyone who'd worked it, that we were just temporary caretakers of something much larger than ourselves. That's a beautiful philosophy. It was also an expensive one. Dell's voice carried old pain. He held on to this place long after common sense said he should sell. Poured every penny into keeping it running, never quite able to make it profitable but never willing to give up trying. Wade was quiet for a moment. And you think that makes him a failure? I think it makes him a dreamer who forgot that dreams don't pay bills. Maybe. Or maybe he understood that some dreams are worth more than the cost of keeping them alive. Wade's voice was gentle. Your father's dream is still here, Dell. You're still here. That has to count for something. Dell felt tears threatening and turned away, focusing on the evening sky that was painting itself in shades of pink and gold. Some days I think I'm just postponing the inevitable, dragging out the end because I'm too proud to admit defeat. And other days, Dell considered the question. Other days I think maybe holding on is its own kind of victory. Maybe just refusing to quit is enough. Wade nodded slowly. I've known men who built empires and lost them overnight. I've also known men who spent their whole lives protecting one small piece of ground and counted themselves rich for it. The difference wasn't in what they owned, it was in what they were willing to sacrifice to protect what mattered to them. Dell turned back to him, struck by the intensity in his voice. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought. I've had reason to. Wade's expression was distant. I've made choices I'm not proud of, valued things that didn't deserve valuing. It's taken me years to understand that wealth isn't always what it appears to be. And what does it appear to be? Wade was quiet for so long that Dell thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Freedom, power, the ability to shape the world according to your will. But those things come with a price, and sometimes you don't realize what you've paid until it's too late to get it back. Dell studied his profile in the gathering dusk. What did you pay? Connection, authenticity, the ability to trust that people value you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. Wade's smile was sad. I've spent years surrounded by people who would disappear the moment my circumstances changed. It's a lonely way to live. Is that why you're here, looking for something more authentic? Wade met her eyes. I'm here because I met a woman who offered a stranger milk from her own cows without asking for anything in return. Because I found someone who values legacy over profit and isn't ashamed to work with her hands. That's rarer than you might think. Dell felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm nothing special, Wade, just a woman trying to hold on to what's left of her family's dreams. That's exactly what makes you special, Wade's voice was firm. In a world that measures everything by market value, you're protecting something that can't be bought or sold. That takes courage. As they finished the evening chores, Dell found herself studying Wade more closely. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the image of a simple drifteth quality of his gear, the way he moved with quiet authority, the depth of his observations about wealth and sacrifice. But there was also something genuine in his appreciation for her simple life, something that suggested he understood the value of what she was fighting to preserve. By the time they'd secured the barn for the night, Dell felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Companionship. Not the forced cheerfulness of well-meaning friends who didn't understand her situation, but the quiet comfort of someone who saw her struggles and didn't judge them. "Thank you," she said as they walked back toward the house. "For the help, for the conversation, for what? For making me feel like what I'm doing here matters." Wade stopped walking and turned to face her. "It does matter, Dell, more than you know." There was something in his voice, a weight that suggested personal knowledge. But before Dell could ask what he meant, he was already walking toward his camp by the creek, leaving her to wonder what secrets lay behind his quiet understanding. 3 days into their arrangement, Dell found herself looking forward to Wade's quiet presence in ways that surprised her. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who found meaning in simple tasks, and his competence with ranch work continued to impress her. More than that, he seemed to understand the rhythm of her days, appearing when help was needed and disappearing when she needed solitude. She was cleaning out her mother's jewelry box when she found the wedding ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had seemed like a treasure when Frank had placed it on her finger 30 years ago. She'd stopped wearing it after the divorce, unable to bear the weight of failed promises, but she'd kept it tucked away with the other remnants of her former life. Now, holding it in the morning light, Dell saw only its potential to buy her time. The ring might be worth $1,000, maybe more if she found the right buyer. Every dollar counted when you were racing against foreclosure. Wade's voice from the doorway startled her. "Sorry to interrupt. I knocked, but..." "It's fine." Dell closed her fingers around the ring, suddenly embarrassed to be caught cataloging her possessions like a woman preparing for a garage sale. "I was just going through some old things." Wade's eyes went to her closed fist, then to her face. "Your wedding ring?" Dell nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness. "I kept it after the divorce. Sentiment, I suppose. Frank was a good man, even if we weren't good together. And now you're thinking of selling it." "I'm thinking of doing whatever it takes." Dell opened her hand, letting the ring catch the light. "It's just sitting in a box, gathering dust. At least if I sell it, it might serve some purpose." Wade moved closer, his expression thoughtful. "May I?" Dell placed the ring in his palm, watching as he examined it with the careful attention of someone who understood value beyond monetary worth. "It's beautiful, simple but well made. The kind of ring that was chosen with love rather than to impress. Frank saved for 6 months to buy it. He was so proud when he gave it to me, so sure it represented our future together." Dell's voice carried old sadness. "I suppose it did, in a way. Just not the future either of us expected." Wade handed the ring back. "What went wrong? If you don't mind me asking." Dell settled into her father's chair, the ring heavy in her palm. "Nothing dramatic. We just grew apart, wanted different things. Frank thought I was too attached to this place, too focused on keeping something that was already gone. He wanted to move to the city, start fresh somewhere we could build our own life, instead of trying to preserve someone else's. And you couldn't do that. I couldn't abandon what my father had trusted me to protect. This place, this land, it's not just property to me. It's the physical manifestation of everything my family worked to build." Dell looked up at Wade. Frank thought that was foolish. He said I was choosing dead people over our living marriage. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Was he right? The question hit Dell like a physical blow. She'd asked herself the same thing countless times during the long nights after Frank left, wondered if her stubborn loyalty to family legacy had cost her the chance at happiness with a man who genuinely loved her. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe. But I know I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd sold this place and then watched it be turned into a shopping center or subdivided into tract housing. Some betrayals are too deep to survive. Even if it cost you your marriage?" Even then, Dell's voice was firm. Frank deserved better than a woman who couldn't give him her whole heart. He found someone who could. They've been married 8 years now, have 2 kids. He's happy in a way he never was with me. Wade studied her face. And you? Are you happy? Dell considered the question. I'm content. Or I was, before all this financial trouble started. There's something to be said for knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for, even if it makes you difficult to live with. You're not difficult, Dell. You're principled. There's a difference. Tell that to my ex-husband. Dell managed a small smile. Or to the banker who thinks I'm crazy for holding on to a place that barely breaks even. Some things are worth more than their ability to generate profit. Wade's voice carried conviction. Your ex-husband and your banker see this place as an asset to be optimized or liquidated. You see it as a legacy to be protected. Neither perspective is wrong, but they're incompatible. Dell felt a flutter of recognition. You understand that distinction better than most people. I've learned it the hard way. Wade's expression grew distant. I've spent years making decisions based purely on financial considerations, optimizing everything for maximum return. It's effective, but it's also soul-crushing. You lose track of why you wanted success in the first place. And why did you want it? Wade was quiet for so long that Dell thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Freedom. The ability to never again feel powerless in the face of forces beyond my control. My family lost everything when I was young. Drought, market collapse, foreclosure. I swore I'd never be in that position again. Dell felt her heart clench. And now? Now I realize that the kind of power I built for myself is just another kind of prison. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I've forgotten how to trust people, how to form genuine connections. I'm surrounded by employees and advisors, but I don't have any real friends. Wade's smile was sad. Success, as I defined it, turned out to be just another form of poverty. Dell studied his profile, noting the way the morning light caught the silver in his hair. Is that why you're here? Looking for something you lost along the way? I'm here because I met someone who reminded me what authentic living looks like. Someone who values connection over accumulation, who chooses meaning over profit. Wade met her eyes. I haven't felt this grounded in years, Dell. Just being here, doing honest work, talking to someone who doesn't want anything from mates, like remembering how to breathe. Dell felt warmth spread through her chest. I'm glad you're here too. It's been a long time since I've had someone to talk to who understands why this place matters. It matters because it's real, because it represents something larger than market forces and financial calculations. Wade's voice grew stronger. Because it's proof that some things can't be bought or sold, only protected and passed down. Dell looked at the ring in her palm, then at Wade's earnest face. My neighbor Martha says I should sell this place and move to town, find a nice apartment and a job at the library. She says I'm too old to be playing pioneer woman. And what do you say? I say some games are worth playing, even if you might lose. Dell closed her fingers around the ring. Especially if you might lose. Wade's expression grew intense. Dell, about your financial situation. I don't want to talk about it. Dell's voice was firm. I've told you more about my problems than I should have already. A woman has to maintain some dignity. But if there were options you hadn't considered. There aren't. Dell stood, moving toward the window. I've explored every possibility, Wade. Refinancing, consolidation, even a reverse mortgage. The numbers don't work. I have 27 days to come up with $17,000, and selling everything I own might get me halfway there. Wade joined her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. What if you didn't have to do it alone? Dell turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. What do you mean? I mean, maybe there are people who would want to help preserve what you're protecting here. People who understand that some things are worth more than their market value. Wade, I can't accept charity. Not charity, investment, partnership, recognition that what you're doing here has value beyond financial return. Wade's voice grew urgent. Dell, there are people with resources who would consider it a privilege to help preserve a place like this. Dell studied his face, noting the passionate conviction in his voice. You're talking about yourself, aren't you? You're not just some drifter with a good horse and quality gear. You're someone with means. Wade's expression flickered. I'm someone who recognizes value when I see it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give right now. Wade's voice was gentle but firm. Dell, I'm asking you to trust me. Let me help you find a way to save this place. Dell felt her heart racing. Why? Why would you care about saving the ranch of someone you barely know? Wade was quiet for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Because some things are worth saving, because meeting you has reminded me of who I used to be before I became who I am now. Because, he stopped, shaking his head, because I can't stand the thought of watching you lose everything that matters to you. Dell felt tears threaten. Wade, just think about it, he said quietly. Don't make any decisions about selling your mother's ring or the silver service until you've considered all the possibilities. Dell nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something in Wade's eyes, a depth of feeling that spoke of more than casual concern. But there was also something guarded, something that suggested he was holding back important information. As Wade left for his morning ride, Dell remained at the window, watching his figure disappear into the distance. She was falling for him, there was no point in denying it. But she was also beginning to suspect that Wade Carmichael was not the simple drifter he claimed to be. The question was whether that mattered, and whether she was prepared to risk her heart along with everything else she stood to lose. Dell was sorting through her father's desk when she found the old survey map, yellow with age and brittle at the edges. She unfolded it carefully, her breath catching as she saw the original boundaries of the Hart Ranch, marked in faded ink. The property had once stretched across nearly 2,000 acres, encompassing the creek, the hills to the east, and the fertile bottom land that now belonged to other families. She traced the boundaries with her finger, noting how the land had been divided over the decades. Here, 50 acres sold during the Depression to pay taxes. There, 100 acres lost to medical bills when her grandfather had his stroke. Each division represented a family crisis, a moment when survival had trumped sentiment. Wade found her there an hour later, the map spread across the kitchen table like evidence of a crime. He studied the document with the focused attention of someone who understood land records, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. Your family held quite a spread, he said quietly. Once upon a time. Dell's voice carried old pain. My great-grandfather claimed all of this in 1892. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, with water rights that made it worth fighting for. Now I've got half an acre and 4 cows. Wade's finger traced the original boundaries. What happened to the rest? Life happened. Drought, depression, medical bills, bad luck, and worse timing. Dell pointed to various sections of the map. This section went to pay for my grandfather's surgery. This part was sold to cover my father's debts after a particularly bad winter killed half the herd. This piece here, she paused, her voice catching, this piece was sold to pay for my mother's cancer treatments. Wade studied the map with an intensity that seemed strange for casual interest. Do you know who owns these parcels now? Dell shrugged. Different people, different companies. Some of it's been subdivided, some turned into strip malls. The bottom land near the creek is still being ranched, but I don't know by whom. Does it matter? Wade was quiet for a long moment. It might. Land ownership patterns can reveal opportunities, especially if you're dealing with financial difficulties. What kind of opportunities? Sometimes adjacent landowners are interested in purchasing small parcels to consolidate their holdings. Sometimes they're willing to pay above market value for strategic pieces. Wade's voice was careful, measured. Have you considered reaching out to your neighbors about selling? Dell recoiled as if he'd struck her. Sell? Wade, I thought you understood. I understand perfectly, but sometimes tactical retreats can be strategic advances. Wade's voice was gentle but firm. What if you could sell to someone who would preserve the land's character? Someone who understood its history and would honor what your family built here. You mean find some benevolent buyer who would let me stay on as caretaker of my own family's land? Dell's voice was bitter. That's not preservation, Wade. That's charity with a pretty bow on it. Wade studied her face. What if it wasn't charity? What if it was partnership? Partnership with whom? You keep talking about hypothetical people with resources and good intentions, but I live in the real world. In the real world, people with money want returns on their investments, not sentimental partnerships with broke ranchers. Wade was quiet for so long that Dell began to wonder if she'd offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Dell, can I ask you something? If you could design the perfect solution to your problems, what would it look like? Dell considered the question. I'd find a way to pay off the mortgage and keep the land. I'd expand the operation gradually, maybe get a few more cows, perhaps try some organic farming. I'd make it profitable enough to sustain itself while preserving its character. And if you could have help achieving that goal. From whom? Wade gestured toward the map. From someone who owned adjacent land, someone who understood the value of what you're protecting and had the resources to help you succeed. Dell felt a chill of recognition. Wade, you're talking about something specific, aren't you? This isn't hypothetical. Wade's expression grew carefully neutral. I'm talking about possibilities, about looking at your situation from different angles. No, you're not. Dell's voice grew stronger. You're talking about something you know. Someone you know. Who is it, Wade? Who's the mysterious benefactor you keep hinting about? Wade stood abruptly, moving to the window. Dell, Tell me. Dell's voice was firm. No more hints, no more hypothetical scenarios. If you know someone who might be interested in helping, I need to know who they are and what they want. Wade turned back to her, something shifting in his expression. What if I told you that I know someone who owns most of the land shown on this map? Someone who's been quietly acquiring parcels over the past 15 years? Dell felt her heart skip. What kind of someone? Someone who grew up poor, who understands what it means to lose everything, someone who's been successful in business but has never forgotten where he came from. Wade's voice grew more intense. Someone who's been looking for a way to give back, to preserve something real and authentic in a world that values everything in dollars and cents. Dell stared at him. You're talking about yourself, aren't you? Wade's silence was answer enough. You own this land. Dell's voice was barely above a whisper. All of it. You own my family's original ranch. Dell, let me explain. How long? Dell's voice was growing stronger, heated by a fury she hadn't known she possessed. How long have you owned it? Some of it for 15 years, some more recently. The Henderson place came up for sale last year, and the Morrison tract. The Morrison tract. Dell's voice was hollow. That's where I used to ride as a child, where my father taught me to rope calves. You own the place where I learned to be a rancher. Wade stepped toward her, his hands extended. Dell, I know how this looks. Do you? Dell's voice was sharp. Do you really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me from the moment we met. Playing some kind of game while I poured my heart out about losing everything. It's not a game. I never meant to deceive you. Then what did you mean to do? Dell's voice cracked. What was the plan, Wade? Were you going to wait until I lost this place to foreclosure and then swoop in with a generous offer? Were you going to let me humiliate myself begging for help while you already owned everything that mattered to me? Wade's face went pale. Dell, please, let me explain why Why you what? Why you've been pretending to be something you're not. Why you've been watching me struggle while sitting on enough money to solve all my problems. Dell felt tears starting but refused to let them fall. Why you've let me fall for a man who doesn't even exist. Wade froze. Fall for me? Dell turned away, angry at herself for the admission. It doesn't matter now. It's the only thing that matters. Wade's voice was urgent. Dell, everything I've told you about myself is true. I did grow up poor. I did lose everything once, and I have been looking for something real and authentic. Meeting you, being Hiret's the most genuine I've felt in years. While lying about who you are, while trying to remember who I used to be, Wade's voice was passionate now. Dell, I came here to see how my land was being managed, to check on my foreman and make sure the properties were being cared for properly. But when I met you, when I saw what you were protecting here, everything changed." Dell whirled to face him. "What changed?" "I remembered why I started acquiring this land in the first place. Not as an investment, not as a business opportunity, but as a way to preserve something that mattered. Your family's ranch. Dell, it's the heart of what this land used to be. It's what gave everything else meaning. And now," Wade's voice was quiet, "now I know that the land without the people who love it is just acreage. You're not just the caretaker of this place, you're its soul. Without you, everything I've built here is just another business venture." Dell felt her anger warring with something else, hope, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't want to be your landlord or your benefactor. I want to be your partner." Wade's voice was steady now. "I want to combine what I have with what you know, to build something together that honors both your family's legacy and the future this land deserves." Dell studied his face, looking for signs of deception or pity. Instead, she found only earnest hope and something that might have been love. "And if I say no, then I'll respect your decision. But Dell, I'm asking you to consider the possibility that sometimes the best way to preserve something is to let it grow." Dell looked at the map spread on the table, then at Wade's patient face. The man she'd been falling for was both more and less than she'd believed, not the simple drifter she'd imagined, but not the deceptive, wealthy man. Her anger wanted to make him either. He was something more complex, someone who'd found his way back to his roots through her. "I need time to think," she said finally. Wade nodded. "Take all the time you need. But Dell—" "What?" "Whatever you decide, please don't doubt that what's grown between us is real. The man you've been getting to know, the one who's been helping with your chores and sharing your conversations, that's who I really am. Everything else is just circumstances." Dell watched him leave, her heart racing with a mixture of anger, hope, and something dangerously close to love. Wade Carmichael was not the man she'd thought he was, but perhaps that was exactly what made him the man she needed. Dell spent the night wrestling with her thoughts, Wade's revelation turning over in her mind like a stone she couldn't stop examining. By morning, she'd made a decision that surprised even herself. She would write letters to her creditors, not to beg for mercy, but to propose a payment plan that maintained her dignity while acknowledging her reality. She sat at her father's desk with a pad of cream-colored stationery, choosing her words carefully. Each letter was a small act of defiance against the forces that sought to reduce her to a number on a balance sheet. She wrote about the land's history, about her family's commitment to responsible stewardship, about her determination to meet her obligations despite temporary setbacks. The letter to Meridian Financial Services took her the longest. She wrote and rewrote it, trying to find the balance between honesty and hope. In the end, she settled on straightforward dignity. "I am writing to formally request a 60-day extension on my mortgage payment. While I understand this request may be outside your standard procedures, I believe my 15-year payment history demonstrates my commitment to meeting my obligations." Wade found her sealing the last envelope when he returned from his morning ride. His face was drawn with worry, as if he'd spent the night grappling with demons of his own. "Dell, about yesterday. I've been thinking about what you said." Dell's voice was steady, though her heart was racing. "About partnership, about combining what you have with what I know." Hope flickered in Wade's eyes. "And? I need to understand what you're really offering. Not the romantic version, not the version designed to make me feel better about accepting help. The real version, with all the business details and legal complications." Wade pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "The real version is that I own approximately 1,800 acres of your family's original ranch. I've been managing it through a series of limited partnerships and ranch management companies, but the ultimate ownership comes back to me." Dell absorbed this information. "And you're suggesting what exactly?" "I'm suggesting we create a new partnership. You would contribute your half-acre and your expertise, along with your commitment to preserving the land's character. I would contribute the surrounding acreage and the capital needed to make the operation profitable. And the control? Wade's expression grew serious. Equal partnership, 50-50 decision-making on all major issues. You would have full authority over day-to-day operations, livestock management, and anything related to the land's use and care. Dell felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. And if we disagree about something fundamental, then we work it out like partners should, through discussion, compromise, and mutual respect. Wade's voice was firm. Dell, I'm not interested in being a silent partner who writes checks and stays out of the way, but I'm also not interested in being the wealthy benefactor who calls the shots. I want to build something together. Dell studied his face, looking for signs of the deception she'd discovered yesterday. Instead, she found only earnest determination. Why me, Wade? You could partner with any number of experienced ranchers, people with better business credentials and fewer emotional complications. Because none of them would bring what you bring to this partnership. Wade's voice grew passionate. You have a connection to this land that can't be bought or learned. You understand its history, its potential, its limitations. More than that, you have the integrity to protect it properly. Dell felt tears threatening. And the personal side, what happens to us if the business partnership doesn't work out? Wade was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but I know that whatever happens between us personally, I want to ensure that you never lose this place. Even if you decide you can't stand the sight of me, I want to make sure the Hart Ranch continues to exist. Dell felt something shift in her chest. You'd do that, even if things went badly between us? Dell, I've been in love with you since the morning you offered me milk from your own cows, without asking for anything in return. Whatever happens to my heart, I want to protect what matters to yours. Dell stared at him. You're in love with me? Desperately, completely, in a way that's probably foolish for a man my age. Wade's smile was rueful. I know the timing is terrible. I know the circumstances are complicated, but I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. Dell felt her careful composure cracking. Wade, you don't have to say anything. I know this is all happening too fast, and I know my deception about who I am has complicated everything. Wade's voice was gentle. I just wanted you to know that my feelings for you aren't tangled up with business considerations or guilt about my advantages. I love the woman who gets up at dawn to milk 4 cows, who values legacy over profit, who writes dignified letters to creditors instead of giving up. Dell looked at the letters stacked on her desk, then at Wade's earnest face. I was about to mail these when you came in. To your creditors? To everyone I owe money to. Formal requests for extensions, payment plans, anything that might buy me time. Dell's voice was steady. I decided I wasn't going to go down without a fight, even if that fight was just maintaining my dignity in the face of defeat. Wade picked up one of the letters, noting the careful handwriting and quality stationery. These are beautifully written, professional, respectful, but not servile. My father always said that how you handle adversity says more about your character than how you handle success. Dell managed a small smile. I may lose everything, but I won't lose it cheaply. Wade was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her with something like awe. Dell, you're extraordinary. Most people in your situation would be bitter, desperate, willing to compromise their principles for survival. Instead, you're maintaining your integrity while fighting for what you believe in. I'm terrified, Dell admitted. Absolutely terrified. But terror isn't the same as surrender. No, it's not. Wade's voice was soft. Dell, I have a confession to make. I've been working behind the scenes, trying to find ways to help you without revealing who I am. I've been researching legal options, talking to financial advisors, looking for solutions that would preserve your independence while solving your problems. Dell felt a chill. What kind of solutions? Anonymous donations to a fund for preserving family ranches, grants from agricultural preservation societies, loans from private investors who specialize in heritage property conservation. Wade's voice grew more urgent. Dell, there are people who would consider it a privilege to help save what you're protecting here. People like you. People including me, but not only me. Wade leaned forward. Dell, what if I told you that I've already arranged for an anonymous donation to cover your mortgage payments for the next 6 months? Not as a loan, not as charity, but as a grant for agricultural preservation. Dell stared at him. You've already done it? I've set up the mechanism. All you have to do is accept it. Wade's voice was careful. The money would come through an established agricultural foundation, completely legitimate, no strings attached. You would simply be the recipient of a grant designed to preserve family ranches. Dell felt anger rising. Without asking me? Without wanting to put you in the position of having to ask. Wade's voice was gentle. Dell, I know your pride is important to you. I know accepting help feels like defeat. But sometimes accepting help is what allows us to keep fighting. Dell stood abruptly, pacing to the window. So, what am I supposed to do? Just accept money from a mysterious foundation that happens to be funded by the man I'm falling in love with? You're supposed to accept help from people who understand that what you're protecting here is worth more than money. Wade's voice was firm. Dell, this isn't about my feelings for you or your feelings for me. This is about preserving something that matters. Dell turned back to him. And if I say no, then you mail those letters and fight this battle with dignity and determination, just like you planned. But you fight it with backup, with people who believe in what you're doing and want to help you succeed. Dell studied his face, noting the passionate conviction in his voice. You really believe this is worth saving, don't you? I believe you're worth saving. I believe what you represent, the connection to land, the commitment to legacy, the willingness to sacrifice for something larger than yourself that's worth preserving. Wade's voice grew stronger. Dell, I've spent years accumulating wealth and power, and none of it has made me as happy as these past few days, helping you milk cows and mend fences. Dell felt tears starting. Wade, I'm so confused. Part of me wants to accept everything you're offering, and part of me thinks that would be the end of who I am. And what does your heart tell you? Dell was quiet for a long moment. My heart tells me that maybe the strongest thing I can do is admit I don't have to do this alone. Maybe accepting help from people who truly understand what I'm fighting for isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Wade's smile was radiant. Does that mean you'll consider the partnership? It means I'll consider the possibility that preserving what matters sometimes requires letting other people help you do it. Dell's voice was steady now. But Wade, if we do this, it has to be real partnership, not you helping the poor, struggling rancher, but two people building something together. That's all I've ever wanted. Wade stood, extending his hand. Partners? Dell looked at his outstretched hand, then at the letters on her desk, then at the man who'd somehow become essential to her life in the space of a week. Partners, she said, taking his hand. As their fingers intertwined, Dell felt something shift inside, her not surrender, but transformation. She was still Dell Hart, still the woman who'd fight to preserve her family's legacy. But now she wasn't fighting alone. Dell was feeding the chickens when she heard Wade's voice from inside his tent, low and urgent. She'd been walking toward the creek to check on the water level when the sound of his phone conversation stopped her in her tracks. No, Marcus, I don't care what the Houston investors are offering. The Hart place is not for sale. Wade's voice carried an authority she'd never heard before. I don't care if they're offering 3 times market value. Some things aren't about money. Dell's blood ran cold. The Hart place. He was talking about her land, her father's ranch, as if it were just another piece of property in his portfolio. Because it's not just acreage, it's heritage. The woman who owns it. Wade paused, and Dell found herself holding her breath. No, she doesn't know who I am yet. And before you say anything, this isn't about some misguided romantic impulse. This is about preserving something that matters. Dell's heart hammered as she realized what she was hearing. Wade wasn't just wealthy. He was apparently wealthy enough to have people calling him about million-dollar real estate deals. And he'd been discussing her property, her situation, with business associates while pretending to be a simple drifter. Look, I've told you before, the Carmichael Ranch expansion is about more than profit margins. It's about creating something lasting, something that honors the land's history. Wade's voice grew more heated. The Hart property is the keystone of the entire operation. Without it, we're just another corporate ranch with no soul. Dell felt sick. The Carmichael Ranch. She'd heard whispers about it in Tone, a massive operation that had been quietly acquiring land throughout the county. People said the owner was some kind of reclusive millionaire who ran his business empire from behind the scenes. Of course, I'm going to tell her eventually, but the timing has to be right. She's proud, Marcus. If I approach this wrong, she'll reject any help out of principle. Wade's voice softened. She's not like the others. She's not interested in money or what I can do for her. She genuinely cares about this land. Dell's hands shook as she realized the full scope of Wade's deception. He wasn't just wealthy, he was the mysterious ranch owner who'd been buying up her family's original land piece by piece. He owned everything that had once been Hart property, and now he was planning to add her small ranch to his collection. No, I haven't proposed yet. I'm waiting for the right moment. Wade's laugh was rueful. And before you ask, yes, I know this is complicated. Mixing business with personal feelings is never smart, but sometimes you don't get to choose when your life changes. Dell felt her heart breaking. Proposed. He was talking about proposing to her, and she couldn't tell if he meant marriage or a business arrangement. Maybe to him, they were the same thing. The foreclosure deadline is in 2 weeks. If she accepts my help, we can structure it as a partnership. If she doesn't, Wade's voice grew grim. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But either way, the Hart place doesn't go to developers. Dell had heard enough. She turned and walked back toward the house, her mind reeling with the implications of what she'd discovered. Wade Carmichael wasn't just hiding his wealth, he was hiding his identity as the man who'd systematically acquired her family's legacy. Every conversation they'd had, every moment of apparent understanding, had been built on a foundation of lies. She was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice, when Wade knocked on her door an hour later. He looked cheerful, relaxed, completely unaware that his carefully constructed deception had just crumbled. Morning, Dell. I was thinking we could work on that fence line today. The posts near the creek are looking a little wobbly. Dell looked up at him. This man she'd been falling in love with, and saw a stranger. The Carmichael Ranch, she said quietly. Wade's expression froze. What? The Carmichael Ranch. That's you, isn't it? Dell's voice was steady, though her heart was racing. You're not just some wealthy businessman with adjacent land. You're the Carmichael Ranch. You're the man who's been buying up half the county. Wade's face went pale. Dell, I can explain. Can you? Dell stood, her hands clenched at her sides. Can you explain why you've been lying to me from the moment we met? Can you explain why you've been pretending to be someone you're not, while I've been pouring my heart out about losing everything? I never lied to you about anything that mattered. Wade's voice was desperate. Everything I've told you about myself, about how I feel. What about the part where you own my family's original ranch? Dell's voice rose. What about the part where you've been systematically acquiring every piece of land my ancestors worked? What about the part where you've been discussing my property with your business associates while pretending to care about my feelings? Wade's expression crumbled. You heard my phone call. I heard enough. Dell felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. I heard you talking about me like I was some kind of charity case, some sentimental obstacle to your business plans. I heard you strategizing about the best way to manipulate me into accepting your help. That's not what, isn't it? Dell's voice was sharp. You said the timing had to be right, that I was proud and would reject help out of principle. You talked about proposing to me like it was a business strategy. Wade stepped toward her, his hands extended. Dell, please, let me explain what you really heard. I heard you talking to someone named Marcus about how my property is the keystone of your ranch expansion. I heard you discussing Houston investors who want to buy my land. I heard you treating my life like it was just another business transaction. Wade's face was stricken. Dell, none of that is what it sounds like. Yes, I own the Carmichael ranch. Yes, I've been acquiring land in this area. But not for the reasons you think. Then why? Dell's voice was barely controlled. Why have you been buying up my family's heritage piece by piece? Why have you been circling around my property like a vulture waiting for me to fail? Wade was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the window, his shoulders sagging. Because 15 years ago, I watched developers turn my own family's ranch into a strip mall. Because I swore I'd never let that happen to other places that mattered. Because I've been trying to preserve something real in a world that turns everything into profit centers. Dell felt a flicker of uncertainty. What do you mean? I mean, every piece of land I've acquired has been saved from development. Every ranch I've purchased has been preserved as working agricultural land. I haven't been destroying heritage, I've been protecting it. From your corporate headquarters? From behind the scenes while people like me lose everything they've worked for? Wade turned back to her, his expression raw. From my desk, yes. From my lawyers and accountants and business managers. Because that's the only way I knew how to do it. His voice grew more passionate. Dell, I've spent 15 years building a business empire, but I've never felt more like myself than I have these past few days, helping you with your cows. Dell stared at him. So what was this? Some kind of experiment in slumming with the common people? This was me trying to remember who I used to be before I became the Carmichael ranch. Wade's voice was desperate. This was me discovering that all the land I've preserved means nothing if there aren't people like you to give it meaning. Dell felt her anger warring with something else, not forgiveness, but a terrible understanding. You could have bought my place years ago. You could have made me an offer I couldn't refuse and saved yourself all this deception. I could have, but then I would have been just another rich man imposing his will on someone else's life. Wade's voice was quiet. I wanted to know who you were first. I wanted to understand what this place meant to you. And now you do? Now I know that you're the heart of everything I've been trying to preserve. You're the reason the land matters, the connection that makes it more than just acreage. Wade's voice was steady now. Dell, I've built an empire, but I've never built anything as meaningful as what you've maintained on this half-acre. Dell felt tears starting. But you've been lying to me. Everything between us has been built on deception. Not deception protection, Wade's voice was urgent. I was protecting you from the weight of what I represent, from the complications of my wealth and power. I wanted you to see me as just Wade, not as the Carmichael ranch, or the man who could solve all your problems with a check. And what about what I wanted? What about my right to know who I was falling in love with? Wade's expression softened. You're right. I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of trying to protect you from it. Dell looked at the foreclosure notice on her table, then at Wade's stricken face. I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know if the man I've been falling for is real or just another role you've been playing. He's real, Dell. The man who's been helping with your chores, who's been talking to you about land and legacy and the things that matter, that's who I really am. Everything else is just circumstances. Dell felt exhausted suddenly, drained by the emotional weight of the revelation. I need you to leave, Wade. I need time to think about all of this. Wade nodded, his face showing the pain of her rejection. I understand. But Dell, please remember that whatever else I am, whatever mistakes I've made, my feelings for you are genuine. And my commitment to preserving this place, to making sure you never lose it, that's real too. Dell watched him walk toward his camp, her heart breaking with every step. She'd been right to suspect there was more to Wade Carmichael than he'd revealed, but she'd never imagined the scope of his deception or the complexity of his motivations. As she sat alone in her kitchen, the foreclosure notice seemed to mock her with its stark reality. In 2 weeks, she would lose everything, and the man she'd thought might help her save it had turned out to be the very force that had been dismantling her family's legacy for years. Dell had never felt more alone or more uncertain about who she could trust, including herself. Dell spent the night in her father's chair, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly about anything except the weight of Wade's deception. As dawn broke over the ranch, She found herself reaching for her father's Bible, the worn leather cover soft beneath her fingers. She'd kept it on the shelf beside his chair, unopened since his funeral, but now she felt drawn to its familiar weight. The pages fell open to Psalms, and pressed between them she found treasures she'd forgotten. Dreed wildflowers from the original ranch, their colors faded but their shapes still recognizable. Indian paintbrush, bluebonnets, black-eyed Susans. Her father had collected them during his morning walks, preserving them like memories between the pages of scripture. But it was the letter tucked into the back cover that made Dell's breath catch. Her father's handwriting, shaky with age but determined, dated just 3 days before he died. "My dearest Delilah," it began, "if you're reading this, then you found yourself in the kind of trouble that makes a person question everything they believe about themselves and their place in the world. I know because I've been there, and I suspect every heart who came before us faced the same moment of truth." Dell felt tears starting as she read her father's words about the drought of 1956, when he'd been forced to sell the first parcel of family land to keep the remaining cattle alive. "I thought I was failing everyone who came before me," he'd written. "I thought I was the weak link that would break the chain of heart pride. But your mother reminded me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help." Her father's words continued, speaking across time about the nature of legacy and the difference between stubbornness and strength. "The land doesn't care about our pride, Delilah. It only cares about being tended with love and respect. If someone else can help you, tend it better. If accepting help means preserving what matters instead of losing everything to prove a point, then pride becomes the enemy of purpose." Dell set the letter aside and looked out at her small ranch, seeing it with new eyes. The past week had shown her what the place could become, with proper resources and partnership. Wade's help had revealed possibilities she'd been too proud or too overwhelmed to imagine on her own. She was still reading when she heard vehicles approaching. Through the window, she saw a caravan of trucks and SUVs pulling into her driveway, their occupants spilling out with the purposeful energy of people on a mission. At the front of the group was Martha Henderson, her neighbor and the unofficial coordinator of every community effort in Dry Creek. "Dell Hart, you get yourself out here," Martha called, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to organizing church socials and volunteer drives. "We've got work to do." Dell stepped onto her porch, amazed by what she saw. At least 20 people had gathered in her yard, including folks she recognized from town, neighboring ranches, and even some teenagers she'd seen at the local 4-H meetings. They'd brought tools, supplies, and enough food to feed a small army. "What's all this?" Dell asked, though her heart was already beginning to understand. "This is what happens when word gets out that one of our own is fighting to save something worth preserving," Martha announced. "Betty at the diner heard about your situation from someone who heard it from someone else. Before you know it, half the county's talking about the Hart place and what it means to all of us." Dell felt overwhelmed. "Martha, I appreciate this, but I can't accept charity." "Who said anything about charity?" interrupted Tom Morrison, a rancher whose family had worked land adjacent to the original Hart spread. "This is about community, about making sure places like this don't disappear because of bankers' math and corporate greed." Dell noticed Wade standing at the edge of the group, his expression carefully neutral. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something there, not expectation or manipulation, but simply support for whatever she chose to do. "Dell, we've been talking," Martha continued, "and we think there might be a way to help you keep this place. It's not charity, and it's not a handout. It's a community investment in preserving something that matters to all of us." "What kind of investment?" Betty from the diner stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. "We've been taking donations, not just money, but commitments. The Morrisons are willing to provide feed for your cows for the next 6 months. The Hendersons will handle equipment repairs at cost. The 4-H kids want to help with daily chores in exchange for learning about traditional ranching methods." Dell felt tears threatening. "I don't understand. Why would you all do this?" "Because this place represents something we're all in danger of losing," said young Jake Morrison, barely 18 but already showing the weathered hands of someone who understood hard work. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Hart Ranch, about how your family shared water during the droughts, how they always helped neighbors with roundups and barn raisings. This place is part of our history too. Dell looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing not pity but genuine respect and determination. But the mortgage payment has been anonymously paid for the next 6 months, Betty announced. Someone heard about your situation and set up a fund through the Agricultural Preservation Society. All you have to do is accept it. Dell's eyes found Wade again, and she saw the truth in his expression. He'd done this, orchestrated this community response while making sure she could accept it with dignity. But he'd also genuinely inspired people to care about preserving what she represented. There's more, Martha continued. We've been talking to the county extension office about setting up a heritage ranch program. Places like this could become teaching farms, showing people how ranching used to be done, how families like yours built the foundation of our community. Dell felt the weight of possibility settling over her. You're talking about turning this into some kind of educational program? We're talking about making sure places like this survive, Tom Morrison said firmly. Not as museums, but as working ranches that teach people about our heritage while remaining economically viable. Dell looked at the small group of buildings that represented 4 generations of Hart dreams, then at the people who'd come to help her preserve them. And you all really think this could work? We think it's worth trying, Martha said. But Dell, it can't work without you. You're the heart of what makes this place special. You're the one who carries the knowledge, the connection to the land, the understanding of what it means to be a steward rather than just an owner. Dell felt something shifting inside her, a recognition that perhaps her father's letter had been preparing her for this moment. What would I need to do? Accept help, Betty said simply. Accept that preserving something this important isn't a job for one person. Accept that the community wants to invest in keeping this place alive. Dell looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing hope and determination reflected in their expressions. These weren't strangers offering charity, they were neighbors investing in their shared heritage. There's one more thing, Martha said, glancing toward Wade. We've been approached by someone who's interested in providing substantial financial backing for the Heritage Ranch program. Someone who owns adjacent land and understands the importance of preserving agricultural heritage. Dell felt her heart racing. Wade? Wade stepped forward, his expression serious. Dell, I want to be completely honest with you and with everyone here. I am the owner of the Carmichael Ranch, and I have been acquiring land in this area for preservation purposes. I'm prepared to formalize a partnership with you that would ensure this place not only survives but thrives. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Dell was surprised to see more interest than shock on their faces. Martha stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Carmichael, we've heard about your ranch operation. People say you've been preserving land that might otherwise be developed. Is that true? Wade nodded. It is. I've been working to create a model of sustainable ranching that honors the land's history while remaining economically viable. Dell's operation here represents everything I've been trying to preserve. Dell felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. And what exactly are you proposing? A true partnership, Wade said, his voice steady. You would retain ownership of your family's land while gaining access to the resources needed to expand the operation. I would provide capital, equipment, and access to adjacent grazing land. Most importantly, you would have complete authority over how the land is managed and used. Dell looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing support and encouragement in their expressions. And if I say no, then the community support continues. Martha said firmly, Wade, we appreciate your offer, but Dell needs to know that our commitment to helping her doesn't depend on any business arrangements. Wade nodded. Absolutely. My offer stands on its own merits, but the community's support is independent of my involvement. Dell felt a flutter of understanding. Wade had orchestrated this gathering, but he'd also created a situation where she could choose freely, without pressure or manipulation. The community support was real, the Heritage Ranch program was viable, and his partnership offer was genuinely separate from both. "I need to think about all of this," Dell said finally. "The community program, the partnership, everything. Can I have until tomorrow to decide?" "Of course," Martha said, "but Dell, whatever you decide, know that we're all behind you. This place matters to all of us, and we're not going to let it disappear without a fight." As the crowd began to disperse, Dell found herself standing alone with Wade. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the yard, and the ranch felt different somehow, not smaller or more vulnerable, but connected to something larger than itself. "You did this," she said quietly. "You organized all of this." "I made some phone calls," Wade admitted, "but the response was genuine. People really do care about what you're protecting here." Dell studied his face, seeing both hope and resignation in his expression. "Why? Why go to all this trouble instead of just making me an offer I couldn't refuse?" "Because I wanted you to have real choices," Wade said simply. "Because I wanted you to know that your value isn't dependent on what I can do for you. Because I needed you to understand that what you represent matters to more people than just me." Dell felt tears starting. "And what if I choose the community program without the partnership? What if I decide I can't trust you enough to build something together?" Wade's smile was sad but genuine. "Then I'll respect your decision and support the Heritage Ranch program from a distance. Dell, I want you to be happy and secure more than I want to be part of your life. If you can achieve that without me, then that's what I want for you." Dell looked at the man she'd fallen in love with, seeing both the simple rancher who'd helped with her chores and the complex businessman who'd orchestrated this day. "I don't know if I can forgive you for the deception." "I don't know if I can forgive myself," Wade replied. "But I know that whatever happens tomorrow, today has shown me that there are still people worth fighting for and places worth preserving. That's something I'd forgotten before I met you." As Wade walked back toward his camp, Dell stood alone in the gathering dusk, her father's letter still clutched in her hand. Tomorrow, she would have to make the decision that would determine not just her future, but the future of everything her family had built. For the first time in months, she felt not just hope, but genuine choice and the community support to make whatever choice felt right. Dell stood in the parking lot of Dry Creek Community Bank, the morning sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. In her hand, she held the check that would save her ranch not from Wade directly, but from the Agricultural Preservation Fund he'd quietly established. The money was real, the documentation was legitimate, and her pride could remain intact. But as she looked at the crisp paper that represented her salvation, Dell felt the weight of everything she'd learned about compromise and community. Her father's letter had spoken about strength versus stubbornness, about knowing when to accept help for the greater good. The community support yesterday had shown her that preserving what mattered wasn't a solitary responsibility. Wade waited by his truck across the street, having driven her to the bank, but respecting her need to handle this moment alone. He'd been quiet during the drive, giving her space to wrestle with the decision that would determine not just her financial future, but the future of her heart. Dell walked into the bank with steady steps, her chin high despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. The lobby was familiar. She'd been coming here since she was a child, holding her father's hand, while he conducted business with men who'd known her family for generations. Mrs. Hart, called Janet Morrison, the bank president and Tom Morrison's daughter-in-law. "I understand you have a payment to make." Dell nodded, approaching the desk where she'd received the foreclosure notice just days before. "I do. But first, I need to know something. The Agricultural Preservation Fund that's providing this money, who really established it?" Janet's expression grew careful. "Mrs. Hart, the fund is completely legitimate. It's been set up through proper legal channels, with oversight from the County Agricultural Extension Office. The benefactor wishes to remain anonymous, but I can assure you that all documentation is in order." "That's not what I asked." Dell's voice was gentle but firm. "I need to know if accepting this money means I'm taking charity from someone I know personally." Janet was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "Mrs. Hart, I've been instructed to tell you that the fund was established by someone who believes agricultural heritage preservation is important to our community's future. The donor has no expectation of personal recognition or private gratitude. Dell felt tears threatening. Wade had structured this carefully, making sure she could accept the help while maintaining her dignity. He'd removed himself from the transaction as much as possible, making it about community values rather than personal charity. And if I wanted to thank this anonymous donor, you would thank them by using the opportunity to preserve something important. That's all they want to know, that places like your ranch continue to exist for future generations. Dell nodded, understanding the message. Wade wasn't asking for gratitude or recognition. He was asking her to save what mattered, regardless of the source of help. There's something else, Janet continued. I've been authorized to tell you that if you're interested in expanding your operation, additional funding is available through the same preservation fund. Not as charity, but as investment in heritage agricultural education. Dell felt her heart racing. What kind of investment? The kind that would allow you to implement the Heritage Ranch program your neighbors discussed yesterday. The kind that would ensure this place becomes a teaching farm that preserves traditional ranching methods while remaining economically sustainable. Dell stared at the check in her hand, seeing not just financial salvation, but the possibility of legacy transformation. And the terms? Full autonomy over operations and management, financial support for expansion and education programs, access to adjacent grazing land if needed. The only requirement is that the land be preserved for agricultural use in perpetuity. Dell felt something shift in her chest. This is more than just paying off my mortgage. This is about creating something lasting, Janet agreed. About making sure that what you represent continues to exist and teach others. Dell looked out the window at Wade, still waiting patiently by his truck. He could have simply paid her mortgage and walked away. Instead, he'd created an opportunity for her to build something meaningful, something that honored both her family's legacy and his desire to preserve what mattered. Mrs. Hart, Janet said gently, I know this is complicated, but sometimes the most important decisions aren't about what we want, but about what we can accomplish for something larger than ourselves. Dell thought about her father's words, about the land remembering, about the community that had rallied to support her, about the possibility of teaching others what she'd learned from 4 generations of Hart wisdom. She thought about Wade's genuine desire to preserve authentic agricultural heritage, even if his methods had been deceptive. I'll take the money, she said finally, all of it, for the mortgage, for the expansion, for the heritage program. But I want to meet with the donor to discuss terms. Janet smiled. I think that can be arranged. He's waiting outside. Dell felt her heart skip. You mean? I mean that some conversations are too important for intermediaries. Some partnerships require direct negotiation. Dell nodded, understanding that this was the moment of truth. She could accept Wade's help while maintaining her independence, or she could walk away and try to build something smaller but entirely her own. As she walked toward the bank's entrance, Dell felt the weight of generations of Hart determination settling on her shoulders. Her decision would determine not just her own future, but the future of everything her family had built and everything the community hoped to preserve. Wade stood beside his truck, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes revealing the depth of his hope and fear. Dell approached him with the check still in her hand, her heart racing with the magnitude of what she was about to decide. Dell approached Wade with steady steps, the preservation fund check still in her hand. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, making this moment feel both ordinary and transformative. Wade's expression was carefully guarded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man preparing for either celebration or devastation. The bank president says the anonymous donor wants to discuss terms, Dell said, stopping a few feet away from him. Something about partnership parameters and operational autonomy. Wade nodded slowly. And what did you tell her? I told her I was interested in hearing what this mysterious benefactor had to say. Dell's voice carried a mixture of caution and hope. But I have conditions. Wade's expression grew more attentive. What kind of conditions? Dell pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, the partnership agreement she'd drafted at dawn, working by lamplight at her father's desk. I've been thinking about what you said, about true partnership, about combining what you have with what I know. But if we're going to do this, it has to be on terms that honor both what you're offering and what I'm protecting. Wade accepted the paper, his eyes scanning the careful handwriting. Dell watched his face change as he read, seeing surprise, then growing respect, then something that might have been relief. Equal partnership in all major decisions, he read aloud. Complete autonomy over daily operations and land management. Heritage Ranch Program to be managed exclusively by the Hart family. Representative, meaning you. Financial investment to be structured as business partnership, not charitable donation. Keep reading, Dell said quietly. Wade's voice grew softer. In the event of irreconcilable differences, the Hart family representative maintains ownership of the original half-acre and first right of refusal on adjacent parcels. All improvements and investments to be considered joint assets with fair compensation for withdrawal from partnership. Dell felt her heart racing. I'm not asking you to give me everything, Wade. I'm asking you to build something with me where neither of us can lose what matters most. Wade looked up from the paper, his expression unreadable. And what matters most to you? The land remaining in agricultural use. The heritage program teaching people about traditional ranching. The ranch staying true to the values my family built it on. Dell's voice grew stronger. And if we're being completely honest, the chance to build something meaningful with someone who understands why all of that matters. Wade was quiet for a long moment. And what do you think matters most to me? Dell studied his face, seeing past the careful control to the vulnerable man beneath. I think you want to create something that honors the land and the people who work it. I think you want to build a legacy that's about more than financial success. And I think you want to do it with someone who sees you as Wade, not as the Carmichael ranch. Wade's smile was slow and genuine. You're right about all of that, but you're missing the most important thing, which is that what matters most to me is making sure you never lose what you're fighting to protect, even if that means protecting it from me. Wade's voice was steady. Dell, I would rather be your business partner than your romantic partner, if that's what it takes to preserve what you've built here. Dell felt tears threatening. And if I said I didn't want to choose, if I said I thought maybe we could build something together that honors both the business and the personal. Wade's expression grew cautious. I'd say that sounds like the most dangerous and most worthwhile thing either of us has ever attempted. Dell reached for the partnership agreement, making a small addition in the margin. Then I'm adding one more condition. Full disclosure, complete honesty, and the understanding that this partnership is about more than just business. Wade read the addition, then looked up at her with something approaching wonder. You're willing to trust me again, after everything I kept hidden? I'm willing to trust us, Dell corrected. I'm willing to believe that two people who care about the same things can figure out how to build something together, even when they've made mistakes. Wade handed the agreement back to her. Dell, are you sure about this? Once we formalize this partnership, there's no going back to the simple life you've been living. Dell looked at the paper in her hands, then at the man who'd somehow become essential to her future. Wade, I haven't lived a simple life since the day I decided to save this ranch. Adding you to the equation doesn't make it more complicated, it makes it more possible. Wade extended his hand, the gesture formal but his eyes warm. Partners? Dell took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of genuine work and the steadiness that spoke of genuine commitment. Partners. In business, in preserving what matters, and in whatever comes next. Wade's grip tightened slightly. And what do you think comes next? Dell smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. I think we go back to the ranch and start building something neither of us could have created alone. I think we show the community that preservation and progress can work together, and I think we see if two stubborn people can learn to share their dreams. Wade's laughter was warm and genuine. I think that sounds like the best investment either of us has ever made. As they walked toward the truck together, Dell felt the weight of generations of Hart determination, settling into something new, not the desperate fight to preserve what was, but the hopeful work of building what could be. The Heritage Ranch program would teach others about the values that had sustained her family. The partnership would ensure the land remained protected, and the man beside her would help her create something that honored both legacy and possibility. For the first time in years, Dell Hart felt like she was building rather than just surviving, creating rather than just preserving. The future stretched ahead of them, full of work and challenge, and the kind of meaningful partnership that made both possible. 6 months later, Dell stood in the early morning light, watching Wade approach the new milking barn with 2 steaming cups in his hands. The sight had become as familiar as sunrise, this daily ritual that marked the beginning of their shared work and the continuation of a partnership that had exceeded both their expectations. The Hart Carmichael Heritage Ranch had transformed in ways that honored both preservation and progress. The original half-acre remained exactly as it had been, Dell's 4 Jersey cows, still the heart of the operation. But surrounding it now were expanded pastures, a teaching facility, and guest quarters for the agricultural students who came to learn traditional ranching methods. "Morning, partner," Wade said, handing her a cup of coffee and a new ceramic mug part of a matching set they'd commissioned from a local potter. The gesture was simple, but Dell understood its significance. They'd replaced the old tin cup with something that spoke of permanence, of 2 people building a life together, rather than just sharing temporary moments. "Morning," Dell replied, accepting the coffee and the quiet intimacy of the moment. "The 4-H kids are coming today for their final presentation. Are you ready to be impressed by what teenagers can accomplish when they're given something meaningful to work on?" Wade's smile was warm. "I'm ready to be amazed. Those kids have learned more about sustainable ranching in 3 months than most agricultural students learn in 4 years of college." Dell nodded, feeling pride in the program they'd developed together. The Heritage Ranch had become exactly what they'd envisioned, a working demonstration of traditional methods that proved old ways could thrive in the modern world. Students came from across the state to learn about rotational grazing, heritage breed conservation, and the kind of land stewardship that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit. "Betty called yesterday," Dell said, settling into the comfortable rhythm of their morning conversation. "The article about the Heritage Ranch is coming out in the Agricultural Journal next month. She wanted to know if we'd be willing to host a conference on family ranch preservation." Wade's expression grew thoughtful. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her we'd discuss it. This place has the capacity to handle a larger event, but I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with that level of exposure." Wade appreciated her consideration. In the months since their partnership had begun, Dell had been careful to protect his privacy while still allowing him to be fully present in their shared work. The balance had required constant communication and mutual respect, but it had created a foundation of trust that made their relationship stronger. "I think hosting a conference would be wonderful," Wade said. "It would give us a chance to share what we've learned about making heritage operations economically sustainable, and it would showcase what you've accomplished here." Dell felt warmth spread through her chest. Wade had never tried to take credit for their success, consistently emphasizing that the ranch's transformation had been built on the foundation of knowledge and values she'd inherited from her family. His business acumen and resources had made expansion possible, but the soul of the operation remained purely Hart. "The Morrisons stopped by yesterday while you were in town," Dell continued. "They wanted to know if we'd be interested in partnering with them on a heritage seed preservation project. Apparently, there are varieties of native grasses that used to grow here that could be reintroduced." Wade's eyes lit up. "That sounds like exactly the kind of project we should be supporting. What did you tell them?" "I told them we'd love to be involved, but that I wanted to research the historical records first. If we're going to restore native grasses, I want to make sure we're doing it in a way that honors what was here originally." Wade nodded, understanding her commitment to authenticity. "Your father would be proud of what you've built here, Dell. You've preserved everything he valued while creating something new and sustainable." Dell felt tears threatening, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "He would be proud of what we've built together. I couldn't have done this alone, Wade. Not just the financial aspects, but the vision, the partnership, the belief that preservation and progress could work together." Wade moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "We make a good team." "We do," Dell agreed. "In business, in preserving what matters, and in love." Wade's voice was gentle, but there was hope in it. Dell smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in her heart. "In love, in the kind of partnership that makes both of us better than we were alone." Wade's expression grew serious. "Dell, I have something for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Dell's breath caught. Not because she hadn't been expecting this moment, they'd been moving toward it for months, but because of the careful way he presented it, as if he understood the weight of what he was offering. "It's not an engagement ring," Wade said quickly. "It's a promise ring, a promise that whatever the future holds, we'll face it as partners, as equals, as two people who understand that the best things in life are built together." Dell opened the box to find a simple silver band set with a small diamond, elegant but not ostentatious, valuable but not overwhelming. It was perfect for a woman who valued substance over showiness, meaning over materialism. "Wade," she breathed, "it's beautiful. It's a promise that I'll never again hide who I am from you, that I'll respect your independence while supporting your dreams, that I'll work beside you to preserve what matters while building something new together." Dell felt tears starting as Wade slipped the ring onto her finger. "And what's my promise? That you'll trust me enough to share your dreams, that you'll let me be part of preserving what you love, that you'll believe we can build something together that honors both our pasts and our future." Dell looked at the ring on her finger, then at Wade's earnest face, then at the ranch that had become their shared dream. "I promise," she said simply. As they walked toward the milking barn together, Dell felt the weight of generations of heart determination settling into something new, not the desperate fight to preserve what was, but the hopeful work of building what could be. The heritage ranch would continue to teach others about the values that had sustained her family. The partnership would ensure the land remained protected and productive, and the man beside her would help her create something that honored both legacy and possibility. Dell Hart had saved her ranch, but more importantly, she'd discovered that the best preservation comes not from holding on alone, but from finding the right person to build with. As they began their morning work, sharing the tasks that had once been hers alone, Dell understood that true wealth wasn't measured in acres or dollars, but in the daily choice to build something meaningful with someone who understood why it mattered. The sun rose over the Hart Carmichael Heritage Ranch, illuminating a future that honored the past while embracing the possibilities that came from genuine partnership. Dell had kept her promise to her father and her family, but she'd also discovered that the strongest traditions were the ones that grew and adapted while remaining true to their essential values. In the end, preservation and progress had proven to be not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a life well lived.